Okay, everyone, why don't we get started as folks are finishing up reviews upstairs and finding their way down. I'll do a few words of introduction. The first part will not have very much to do with this evening's lectures themselves. Because I just want to set a little bit of context. This evening is the Charles and Ray Eames lecture, which is a lecture series that celebrates the work of, well, up, well, yeah, we'll get that. And then I'll start again, and they'll edit out the this portion. Because they're really good at that. Okay, better? Perry says good. So if Perry says good, it is good. He is my judge. So in any event, I'm going to start by introducing the context of this evening's lecture before I go on to introduce the lecturers themselves. This evening is the Charles and Ray Eames lecture for the year. And the lecture series celebrates the work of one of the world's most outstanding design partnerships. In their inventiveness, enlightened patronage, and serious play of collaborative work, Charles and Ray Eames, together with Herman Miller Incorporated, not Mr. Herman Miller, but the firm, transformed the landscape of design not only in America, but across the world. From their earliest work together, Charles and Ray Eames and Herman Miller explored the properties of materials, economy, and the potential of production in order to make good design more widely accessible. Our Taubman College's Charles and Ray Eames lecture series continues each year to highlight a partnership of architects or designers. And it is special in the fact that we not only invite, but we require both partners to join us here to lecture together, which I think does really make the context, I think, really even that much more interesting and important. The lecture you'll hear this evening by the firm Oualalou+Choi, Tarik Oualalou and Linna Choi, is, I think, a really appropriate talk for this lecture series. Based in Paris and Casablanca, I believe that their work really challenges the sort of narrow definition of architectural production and begins to open up a conversation for architects to engage with the projects of architecture and the built environment as part of an ongoing negotiation that both precedes and outlasts the actual activity of work of design in the architecture office. Believing that our agency as architects is best enhanced by a larger and longer conversation that not only engages the discipline, but also engages the kinds of ways our disciplinary knowledge and our skill sets can have a greater impact on the work that we produce and the environments that our clients and others occupy. I'm just going to say a couple of quick words about Linna and Tarik. Linna received her master's degree in architecture from Harvard University's Graduate School of Design and her Bachelor of Arts degree in architecture from Yale. And Tarik received his degree in architecture from the École d'Architecture Paris Malaquais. And in addition, and I like this part too, holds a degree in art history from the École de Louvre and a degree in civil engineering from the Conservatoire National des Arts et Métiers in Paris. And I think that this breadth of experiences, I think, says a whole lot about the approach of their practice. I should also note that they have both practiced in architecture firms in New York and in Boston before departing back to Paris and opening their own practice about 15 years ago. They work on a vast range of programs and scales. Their work encompasses museums, luxury hotels and resorts, social housing, sports complexes, and master plans for both existing and new cities. They've also won numerous awards and their work has been published internationally and exhibited in Paris, Casablanca, London, and Copenhagen. I want to say a little bit, just very briefly, about why we invited Tarik and Linna to speak with us today. I am probably, of some of the faculty in the room, one of the last folks to actually encounter them in person. Oualalou and Choi, along with their previous firms, Kilo Architects, and even prior to that, have had a long-standing relationships with a number of faculty in our faculty, including Mireille Radier. I believe Anya has brought students to their office to get tours, and more recently myself, where they really welcomed me for what was supposed to be, I think, a 20-minute conversation in their office in Paris in the fall, and I think it was several hours later when I left. And I have to say, this was the tail end of a trip to France that started traipsing around France with Anya Sirota's studio and their work, and I was rather exhausted, and I have to say, I walked away from this conversation so incredibly excited, both by them and their work, and what I hope will be some ongoing conversations about how we can better engage and leverage some of their knowledge of France and Paris in particular, but also Casablanca and Morocco, and some ongoing interactions between our school and their world. So with that, I will bring you up here and
thank you. Thank you very much. Both yours.
Where's the remote?
Yep. Go ahead.
You have the remote?
Mm-hmm.
The remote for the slide.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Sharon. You do everything here at the school. We're very, very honored to be here with you all, giving the Charles and Ray Eames lecture. Obviously, they're great heroes of ours, so this is a very deep and profound honor for us. We see many familiar faces here in the room, which is funny because this is our very first time visiting the school and our first time in Michigan and the Midwest. And today we made two great discoveries. One was the fact that the architecture school here is not in the ugliest building on campus, which is very rare. And two, we discovered the diversity and quality of the work that you produce here, which we were unfamiliar with, and it impressed us very much. So thank you for that. Tarik hates it when I talk about the office in a personal way, but I think many of you have asked us about how we came into being, so I'll explain very quickly. We're what I like to call a post-9/11 office. We were working in France the summer of 2001. We were on our way back to New York to open up the office in New York and to start teaching, and 9/11 happened. Tarik being Moroccan, a Moroccan male between the age of 16 and 45, he was not very welcome back in the States. So we ended up staying in Paris and founding the firm there. And after that, with a great deal of luck, the office took off, and we've been partners ever since. Like Charles and Ray Eames, we're true partners. We work together, we teach together. We have two very mischievous children together. And as it's a life partnership, it's a tricky thing. It's not easy. One thing I learned, though, I had the great honor and pleasure of working and living with Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown for a while. And they explained to me that the only way they survived and they didn't kill each other was the fact that however much they fought at the office, however much they yelled and screamed and tore each other up, as soon as they walked in the door at home, they became cooing turtle doves. You'd have to leave it at the door. I'm not sure that we have managed as successfully as Bob and Denise, but we try. We've never done a lecture together like this, so if it's a bit awkward, I apologize in advance, but we'll try to share the podium a bit. So I guess, I guess I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Well,
Thank you for having us. I first want to lay out an argument, and then we'll go through what we're going to try to talk about today. We don't usually like to talk about The Office because I think the intimate stories are not very important. The big story is important, the little stories are not. They're our own secrets. But we also don't like to explain the projects as we do them because they're often, these explanations you see in lectures, often reconstructions, artificial reconstruction of something that is actually not made that way. The making of architecture is something that is far uglier than you'd imagine. I like to take this quote from Bismarck and add architecture to it because making architecture is really ugly and sweaty and bloody. And in order to make it right, we have to do a whole lot of things that we can't talk about here, of cheating, lying, crying, begging, all sorts of things that are absolutely necessary and not very gratifying. So one of the reasons that we don't talk about the project themselves is that we would feel obliged to share certain things that you may not be able to unsee after that. But it's also because all of these form of explanations becomes, and I hope you'll pass me the term, forms of pornography, in the sense that it shows too much and it doesn't tell enough things. And there's even a perverse digression of that, is that there's entire generations of projects that are designed in the way they're going to be shown and explained, and it loses the secret and the magic of what we do, which is not to say that we don't have an argument when we make a project, but there's necessity for the secret in the trade to a certain extent. So what we're going to do today is propose a few strategies to explain what we do a little bit. And these strategies are about how we can hopefully try to make architecture relevant. And I say this with as much modesty as possible, but it's quite evident that architecture has become completely irrelevant and sometimes very even unnecessary. Most of what you see architect doing could be not done or shouldn't be done. And most of these projects aren't absolutely profoundly necessary. And it's that necessity that we're looking to do in our projects. So as architects, we have two possibilities. One, we collaborate, not collaborate in the sense of nice collaborations within office. I mean, more like the French in Second World War. Because we build in a system that is not only pathological, but that is toxic. The system is ruining the only planet we have. And if you want to have a meaningful practice, you have to be collaborating within this system. And anybody who tells you otherwise is not being entirely forthcoming. So how do you engage with the complicated set of ecologies, which are clearly decadent? I mean, I can't say that everything that you see around you still makes a lot of sense, whether it's in the political system, economical system, the way people behave with each other. The only thing that this system still creates is all forms of illusions that maintains everybody within it with an extreme form of apathy, and that we don't like. Second option is, I don't know if cower is a good word, but it's a moment of retreat. It's finding hedonistic pleasure in the making of architecture in such a way that you can justify to retreat from the world. And there are many forms of this retreat, and there's amazing architects producing this architecture that is en rupture, that refuses to engage with reality. So if you don't want to collaborate, and if you don't want to cower, then there's a very little space left, and we call it trench warfare because that's the only way we can describe it. This, I use the notion of a trench because that's exactly what we do in every project. We build a small, sinuous, tedious trail of clarity in a world of extreme complexity, and it's lifting this clarity from the mud that we try to do every time, and not always succeeding. And we usually like to talk about the moments where we fail because we've been fortunate enough not to build too many of those failures, but they're also very important in the way we learned our trade. When we started the practice with Linna, and this I would say about the office, we've always considered the practice of architecture as a form of cultural resistance, but we were wrong. It's not. And the only way we can look at it now is a form of revolt. Does revolt mean something in English? Okay. So resistance is not enough. And that's what we're going to try to explore today. So, I like this guy. I like this guy because, with this, he embodies a lot of the thing that, we all think about what's being produced around the planet. And when you say nice building, then what? It's exactly what most architects do. You do decent looking building, on budget, on time, responding to the program, you're socially aware, you engage with the community. So what? The so what means that there are three notions that Linna and I try to evacuate completely from our work. The first one is this notion of context. We don't do context. We don't like context, which is not to mean that the building don't touch the ground. I firmly believe that architecture is the relationship that man builds between the ground and the sky, but that's that. We don't do program either. And that's more complicated because the last 30 years of architecture has been about building buildings that are computation of programs or rewriting a program or reinventing program. But the reality is that working on this notion and making buildings respond to the program is the surest way to make them obsolete even before they see the light of day. There's three things that an architect does. He has a relationship with a client, a contractual relationship, which we have to fulfill as well as we can. We have a social contract with the community. We've built public spaces that the client pays for, but that everybody else enjoys. And we also build for the birds, the trees, the climate, and the tribes. We have an ontological necessity in making things, which is not to build for one man, not to build for all the men, but to build for life to a certain extent. So working with just the program is just working for the man. And we don't like to work for the man. Third, we don't do materials. We don't do materials in the sense that we refute the conversation of materiality as a way to make the project. Of course, architectural projects are deep material incarnations, almost in a religious dimension, but that's for later. The entire shifting of the conversation into materiality is a symbol of how you reduce the role of the architect to the crust of the building, to those 4 feet of facade that you're allowed to design. The architect becomes a artistic director, pattern manager, skin designer of sorts. And we don't like to do that either. So what we're going to try to do today is propose 5 lateral strategies, which are neither contextual, nor programmatic, nor material, which doesn't leave much to talk about. But we're going to try. Bear with me. If you have questions, do interrupt me. Sometimes, especially when it's almost 1 a.m. In Paris, my English slides a bit. So if I make no sense, it's either because of the language, then stop me, or it's just because that's the way it is. First approach, and I'm going to try to be not painfully didactic, but at least I'll be able to count till 5. The notion that we're building landscapes and not building buildings. The way we do this is that we try to refute simply to create the relationship between a building and its landscape, but it's about the reduction of 1 or 2 architectural dimensions to the point that the building stops being 3-dimensional, that it becomes only a trace in the landscape. And this trace actually creates a relationship with what's there, maybe sometimes, maybe all the time, maybe never. If you have been to Morocco and you go next to the Atlas Mountains, you would see a lot of these little walls. This is one of the most decorated ones. Usually it's just a wall with a hole in it. And this is everywhere. And it's only used once a year. The rest of the time, nothing happens. Once a year for one of the religious holiday, for the Eid, everybody goes to pray once. And then we'll say everybody is the only time in the year where men, women, children, everybody just gathers together. The rest of the time is just like this. The notion that a building becomes a landscape, including in its immaterial and memories, is something that's quite important. That obliges us to not look at architecture in its forms of articulation, but as something that is precisely disarticulate and architectural that way. We're going to talk about the first project, which is one of the first large projects of the office. It's a museum of the Roman site of Volubilis. Mireille knows a little bit. Volubilis is an incredible site. First, because it's one of the few Roman cities say on the outskirts of the empire. If you're really naughty, this is where you were sent, okay? So it's not so glamorous back then, but today, what makes it beautiful is that it hasn't changed. You see Volubilis the way the Romans made it. Nothing has been built around. The plain, the landscape of the Zerhon around, is vines and wheat and olive trees and hills the way the Roman made it. When we arrived, that's Volubilis, it's like this. There's only one part of the area, I can't see anything, here that is not built. The French had built there in the early 20s a series of small buildings for the archaeological team that was there. And we were first tasked to renovate these things. When we went to look at them, they were historically present, but they were not very interesting. And they were extremely damaged. As you can see, you have this kind of diagonal cuts that you typically see in an earthquake, simply because the Romans, being smarter than the French, they haven't built there because you couldn't build there. The land was unstable. So we were asked to renovate this, and we considered that it made no sense. One, because these buildings were higher than the ground. So they were the only thing that would stop you from seeing the entire landscape as you would enter. So we proposed to our Minister of Culture to tear them down. A year and a half of negotiation with UNESCO led us nowhere. It's an internationally protected site, impossible to do anything. They said, you renovate or you build your museum elsewhere. After 1.5 years, I have to say, both the minister and myself were feeling a big surge of anti-colonialism feel. Like, who, pardon my French, who the fuck think they are to tell us what we can do or not do? So we had to meet with them on Tuesday, and I offered to resolve the problem during the weekend by tearing down the buildings, which we paid with our own dime. We hired 2 contractors with the demolition machines, and the weekend was enough. On Tuesday, there was nothing, and we started a conversation. They were not very happy. But it did manage to start a conversation not about what was there. The fact that it's old doesn't mean it makes sense. In this particular case, what we wanted to do is not a building, but is a structure that's inserted in the landscape. I know as students, sometimes you like to do projects inside the hill because it's not. You have to understand that building in a hill means you take the hill, you remove it, you put the building, and you put back the hill. It's an extremely violent and radical position, especially in such an archaeological sensitive site. And every time the guys of UNESCO were like, but you did archaeology, you understand, you can. I'm like, no, trust me, it's gonna work. So what we did is build a dam, a concrete dam that's 300 meters long, and we grafted a series of buildings in it. Our only architectural strategy was as follows. We wanted to inscribe in the building the duration of disappearance through the use of different material, concrete, wood, and stone. So we were not trying to mimic a ruin, but we were making a ruin in the making. The interesting part of this building is that the highest point of it is lowest than the lowest point of the site. So it's both buried, that's what you see when you enter, and suspended when you go through it. You never go inside it, you only go through it. You go inside it when you come back from visiting the site. And the rest of the time are just series of outdoor spaces, outdoor auditorium for the kids, the vestiaire, the bathrooms, very simple program, which in the end was absolutely irrelevant to the project. But the interesting part of this building is that by inserting something that was so thin, so long, it's 6 meters wide, 300 meters long, we managed to not erase the architectural scale, but change its relationship to the landscape, to the point of the building itself becoming a form of landscape. Okay, I told you I'm not going to talk about materials, but this is a funny story. In Morocco, we make incredible concrete. There's a tradition of very heroic 50s concrete. And what we wanted is this kind of concrete, something that has acne, has thickness, not Peter Zumthor, not Tadawando, something with meat, right? And we had no money. We built this with absolutely no money and with contractor that didn't know how to do anything. So what we decided to do, because of the lack of resources, is to build the formwork of the concrete with the most expensive wood we could find from the region, cedar, and then use it to actually, put the concrete in. And then we take out the wood. We let it dry for a year and a half on le ponce. We clean it. And then we put it back on the facade. That's what you see when you see this, right? So the wood on the facade is the wood we use for the formwork. All we had to do is wait a year and a half for it to dry. But it also allowed us to do the kind of details you would never see in Morocco, such as this, because it's actually the same wood that you use for this and for that. Okay. This exploration of the line and its thickness we used in many different projects. Another one that is interesting is this sports center for a large corporate entity in a corporate town. The interesting part of this project is that we had very little program with a very big site. So what we propose is to aggregate all of the program, which had, lockers and bathrooms and all the support program. You would have small hotel for the athletes and so on, in a thin crust, not on the edge of the site, but within the site, so as to create a relationship to the public space. That's the crust. The site had this weird limit, which we didn't care so much about. We pushed the whole thing in, and we start creating this relationship with the public space, the rest becoming less important. We also explore this notion of the light in a domestic way, and that's more challenging. We designed a series of houses in the middle of nowhere, and two of them wanted to be exactly in the same place because the two owners wanted the same view. And we're talking about something that's 60 acres, big site. We're not used to work on such big things. We usually work on small plots of land as architect. When you work on 60 acres, you ask very basic architectural questions, the wind, the air. You actually have to find the place, which is extremely complicated because you're never asked to find the place to build. You're always told, say, that's where you're building. In this case, after spending a lot of time, everybody wanted to have the same view. So we decided, even though the site was very big, to put these two houses very close to each other in an extremely thin dimension, which creates a house that is almost uninhabitable, right? Because you have to go through space to go through space. And it led us to discover something that we wanted to try, which is to say that convenience, commodity, comfort are probably the worst thing that happened to the domesticity. The most convenient a space is, the less desirable it often is. And I don't know if suburban America is a good example for it, but I'll let you ponder on that. So the house is very difficult to live in. That's it. It's difficult to live in, but it's beautiful, and it creates the site that it wants to be in, and people adapt to the space instead of the space adapting to the people. I don't know if that sounds strange, but it's really actually comfortable. I'm on track, right? Second theme, familiarity. So first strategy is not to make a building, and to make a landscape instead. This second notion of familiarity is something harder to explain. It's for us building familiar buildings that have never been built before. The notion of familiarity has to do with the evocation that everybody shares, everybody knows, but nobody can formulate. So it's not working with typology, but it's working with memory to create typologies. And I'm going to talk about a couple buildings. One is we were asked to do a temporary space for l'Institut du Monde Arabe to replace this giant turd of Zaha Hadid. Sorry, Zaha. And it was interesting because it was supposed to be a space to follow an exhibition on contemporary Morocco. And all they had in mind is to put a traditional tent that you have in Moroccan weddings. I'm like, you have inside contemporary artists, and outside you're gonna have folkloric, touristic, orientalist vision of Morocco. You have a problem with that? So they let us do it, and we proposed a very simple notion. You want a tent? Let's do a tent. But the notion of a tent is that it's both profoundly Moroccan, but completely universal. You have the tipi, the yurt, the Danish, everybody has a tent. And it's almost the first, most primitive expression of a non-architecture. And that we liked. And in order to propose a structure, we decided that we wanted to create a space that was not a traditional tent in the sense that it was raising from the ground. It was a form of topography, and we wanted to use a fabric that's made deep in the Sahara, which I'll explain why. And this fabric is made out of camel's hair, and it's been woven by only women in the Sahara for as long as we can record. But in order to put it in Paris, we had to have French workers, des compagnons, very highly skilled workers to put it together. And we had to be literally the translator between these cooperative of women and these highly skilled workers to be able to design, build, and open this within a space of 5 weeks. So we had to do the cheapest, fastest, lightest structure possible, which means as little material as possible. It's a 500 square meter space, so tiny. By the way, we realized with Linna that the smaller our building are, the more people talk about it, which is completely unfair. But it was interesting to work with the pattern guys because in the end we had to weave the material, which were bands of textile, which were 40 centimeters, 1.5 foot, by 20 meters long, not realizing that it would rain. And so we put it all up, and it started raining. And when it rains, we just realized that we should have had more women with us on the construction site, because as it happens, wool shrinks. The whole thing fell apart, and we had to put it back in. And we had an entire system of keeping them in water for the longest time. The beautiful thing of a tent-style structure is that it only looks good when it's finished. You can have no sense of what it is. It looks like an old skin until it gets tensed. But we decided also to put the fabric itself not in a situation of tension, but in situation of following the contours of the tent, which gave it a dimension almost of a prehistorical animal. At the opening of this, sorry, you have to hear this again. At the opening of this, Jean Nouvel, who always comes at l'Institut du Monde Arabe because he considers it belongs to him, was there, as usual, with a big crowd. But in this case, because there were very, famous people, the King of Morocco, the President of France, nobody was caring much for Jean, which looked completely lost. And I love the guy. Yeah, I worked for him and hold him the highest regard. So he sits exactly where this picture is taken, which is wise. And I go to him and say, Jean, qu'est-ce que tu en penses? I'm a young kid with him. Yeah, I worked for him. And, I'm very impressed with the guy. He looks at it, he's like, Tarik, franchement, j'ai fait un beau bâtiment. Meaning, I've done a beautiful building. He's looking at Lima behind it. But you know what? It's actually a very beautiful compliment, because this building is mitigating the relationship between two icon buildings in Paris. One is l'Institut du Monde Arabe, and the other one is Jussieu. And it completely reframes their relationship. I love this picture because it's not photoshopped. And it's a piece of savannah inside Paris. Second project with this notion of familiarity is we were asked, and we were very proud to do it. We were selected to do the pavilion for the International Fair in Milan for the Kingdom of Morocco.
World Expo.
World Expo. And we're excited to do it because there are a lot of very iconic moments in the history of architecture that happened in these World Expos. And some of them are experimental. So I start researching how Morocco did participate. And I realized that Morocco has participated in every single World Expo ever since 1889. So before the colonial times, all throughout the century, and always with the same exact building. Arcades, tiles, handicraft, mosaic, including when it's designed by great architect. The previous building is de Mazière Faraoui, incredible modernist architects who rebuilt Agadir, and they proposed this. So everybody has done this. So you could imagine that before the turn of the 20th century would make sense. You could almost imagine that during the colonial time it makes sense. Say even during the 80s when it gets postmodern, it makes sense. That's 1992, my favorite. Incroyable. But where it stops making sense, it's 2010 in Shanghai, where Morocco itself projects this image of identity that's fantasmé, that doesn't exist, that's never existed, right? So we decided to propose something else at the risk of being fired and told them we can't do this, or at least we're not the right people to do it. So what we decided to do is to, in order to not have too much pressure from the government, to get them to work inside. This is the site of Expo, which was organized as a Roman town. That's the Decumano, east-west, and there's a Cardo going here, north-south, and our site is here. It just so happened that you would enter through the north. So we said, take the entire country, put it in the building. You arrive through the Detroit of Gibraltar, go through the mountains, into the plains, through the desert, and you exit. They were so excited by this idea, which was moronic, but it got them to let us do whatever we wanted on the outside. So what we propose is to build something that is made of many things. And that's quite important to understand how architecture is made in the Mediterranean. It's never one thing, it's never many things. It's always an assemblage at different levels. You could call it fractal if you want. But it also has to do with the fact that we had very little time, very little money, and we wanted to respond to the basic theme of the expo, which was feeding the planet. And the only contribution that Morocco has to feed the planet is not to show its agricultural feat, but its rurality, la ruralité, which is an incredible balance between the man and the environment, between the environment and the resources, between the sociology of the cities and the sociology of the countryside. If Morocco, which now has 50% of its population still lives in the countryside, moving a threshold of 80%, then it's no more monarchy. I mean, the basic notion of its foundation is in the rurality. So that allowed us to not talk about all the previous architecture, which is all urban, arcades and tiles and all of these things. So we do a form of arte povera. We just work with earth. So we thought that building with earth would be a good idea. Had we known how complicated it would be to build in 6 months for Morocco, in Italy, in earth, we would never have done it. Yet we tried. So we designed a system of prefabricated adobe blocks. First time it's been done. They're 2 meter by 2 meter by 60 centimeters, and we just stack them in a structure that's wood, and we start stacking it. And probably the most incredible part of this building is that it has no weather threshold. The only red line I drew for our client was that I had wanted absolutely no air conditioning. The cracks and windows that you see there are completely open. So during the winter, when it's 40 degrees outside in Milan, it's 33 degrees inside. So it's nicer. It's not 23 degrees. It's not freezing cold. It's just a little bit colder. And then when it's cold outside, it's just a little bit warmer. And that is, for me, the quintessential Moroccan experience. So everybody, I say familiarity because I have people coming to me and said, I loved your Casbah. I was like, no, come on. But people see whatever they want to see in it, and I'm quite happy with it. And that has to do with something that both Linna and I cherish very much, is the fact that we don't finish our building. We don't ever want to finish our building. I know we are in a period or in a realm of architectural photography where if people do something to your building, or if there's too many people in front of the image, it's not very desirable. We actually can consider that buildings don't belong to us. I know it sounds simplistic to say that, but it's true. Let me give an allegory or metaphor I try to give. For us, buildings are like musical scores. They exist in and of themselves, but it only makes sense when they're being performed and being played. And that space, the capacity for people to take over what you do and do whatever they want with it, I'm fine with it. If Keith Jarrett wants to do a jazz version of the Goldberg variation, I have no problem with it. Comparison notwithstanding, I don't mind if they do anything they want to what we build. And that leaving the space has to do with the fact that if you finish your building, if you don't leave the room for people and for the birds and the tribes and the climate, then they're stillborn. They're just dead. It's a downer, right? This building was also successful because of what we didn't do. Everybody did very big spaces. We did a small building and a large garden. Ended up being the most visited one because it was at the end of the trail and people just wanted to sit down under an orchard and have a cup of tea. Had nothing to do with the building, had to do with the fact that we decided not to build there. One before last project on the notion of familiarity. We're building with Linna a centre culturel, cultural center for Morocco in Paris, on a site that's extremely politically charged on Boulevard Saint-Michel, at the heart of the student quarter near La Sorbonne. And we were asked by the state of Morocco to build something that embodies Morocco and by Paris to build a Parisian building. Complicated story. What we decided to do is to consider the building not as a building, but as a fabric, and to start looking at not so much what distinguishes our urban and architectural culture, but what actually brings it together. There is not much difference between the heart of the Medina of Fez and the heart of the Fifth arrondissement in Paris. I don't know if you can tell which one is which, but the left for me is Fez and the right is in Paris. And this relationship to compression, to the street, to how we stack things together is how we started to approach the project. The project is tiny. We're talking about a 30 feet wide facade and 100 feet deep site. So all we could do is make it a street that you can go through. Did I make mistakes with my feet then? No, okay. So the building is 12 volumes that are stacked together that you can go through at every possible level. And if all goes well, we're starting construction of this in September. I'll continue on this notion of the relationship between the part and the whole. That's something that's quite dear to us, even though it sounds like a very Renaissance dialectic. But the fact that something isn't just one thing, but it's made of many things, each of the things being something that has sense. We had to work for a very large, luxurious hotel company who is building in Rabat, in Morocco, a urban resort on a site that has absolutely no interest whatsoever. And what they wanted is a big hotel. And we tried to convince them that a hotel wouldn't work so well because this notion of a big corridor with a room on the left and room on the right isn't necessarily how you experience the site. So we managed to debrand the notion. Now I know this notion of branding is hard to hear, but we had to tell them that their brand isn't where the project was going to start and that we didn't care. They do make crystal and it's beautiful, but we're not gonna make a building in glass because it's baccarat. We're not gonna try to find within the brand something to make the building because 5 years after that, it becomes a Hilton. And then you look like a moron. And that has to do with program. The brief that you're given can't be the brief that you're given. The people who give it to you don't actually think about the life of the building and especially how it's going to be experienced by everybody else. So in this particular project, what we decided to do is in the continuation of what I showed you before, not a building, but a series of buildings, a fabric that tried to give something that's very simple, this sense of interiority, and erase the relationship to the beehive that you have in this kind of spaces. It works because we've taken every public space in a hotel, the bar, the spa, the conference room, the restaurant, the entry, all of these, and instead of putting them inside the hotel, we put them outside. So from the street, you can go to any one of these things. And when you go just into the hotel, you've got nothing else. So it just creates a different relationship to the street, and erasing completely the value of use of what happens behind, strictly in a completely transformative, I would say, stone facade. Transformative in the sense that we wanted something that could be a column and that could become a wall. How did the guy call them? Those things? That rice guy? Isn't it? Terrell? How do you call the sky view things? James Terrell, yeah.
The space station?
Yeah. We visited Rice not so long ago, and James Terrell built this beautiful
Sky space.
building, right? There's nothing happens in it. And they made us visit it like it was something incredible. It's a nice white building. You go in it, you go up, there's a hole, you see the sky. And they're like, whoa. I'm like, okay, either they're crazy or I'm crazy. But where I come from, that's how we see the sky every day. Anyway. And that's to you.
Okay. Thanks. So I'm going to talk about this notion of architectural cannibalism. Let's see. Buildings must transform and mutate in order to survive. Architecture's always been a form of cannibalization of existing sites. Situations in buildings, from the Hagia Sophia to the rebuilding of Rome with its own stones. Architecture is never new, never pure. It's always recycled in a certain way. Some of our projects propose a form of architectural cannibalism, and it's strategies that digest existing buildings. They address strategies of intervention that are structurally foundationless or groundless, using the extant structure as a base for a new construction. These interventions, whether of addition or subtraction or grafting or parasitism, attach themselves to an existing building in some manner. Showing this example, this is a building called Ninabe, which was built by Apat Afrique for the 9th Siam, which is, in English, it's International Congress of Modern Architecture, in 1953. And at the time, it was one of the reinventions of the modern movement. It's a collective housing project built by Candelis and Woods, in which the architects studied indigenous housing, and they tried to reinterpret it in a new and modern way. So what they built here was a series of stacked courtyard patio houses to build this beehive structure. And if you look at it, it's a beautiful structure. It's very abstract. You don't see windows, you don't see doors. And some years ago, Tarik was working on an exhibition about Casablanca. He went to go photograph the building. And he had the exact address, but he couldn't find it anywhere. And he was completely baffled. And that's because there it was. And you can see the skeleton of it behind. And what happened was the building had mutated. What the architects had thought the inhabitants wanted, which was to continue a mode of courtyard living in modern times in a bar building, was not really the case. What everybody wanted in reality was an extra room. So you see there, they blocked in all the rooms, and they've put in little windows with iron grills, right? And for us, this was a very, very good lesson, in the sense that we have to be careful that you don't caricaturalize your approach to reality. Reality is much more complex. Buildings will transform themselves in surprising ways that are beyond your prediction. This is a project that we worked on. So what our office does is we like to work on projects that are outside the commercial realm of architecture, both Tarik and I. And the office helped to found an organization in Casablanca to protect 20th century buildings. Historic preservation is usually something that we think about only for much older buildings. And often these buildings, these gems of the modern movement are demolished. Here this is a bar, it's a bar building by Courtois, which was built in, when was it built? 53. So it's basically, it's the same period as the building I showed you before. It's an archetype of the bar building of the 50s. And it was in a terribly rundown condition. And we proposed to one of our large clients who was looking to build a new headquarters that we promised to build them a tower. So they were very happy with us. We proceeded to propose to give them this, which was we inserted a tower into a bar building. You can see there. Using the pretext to rehabilitate the rest of the building and thereby saving it. And this was it's one of the ways in which we use this notion of cannibalization in a positive way. And you can have new buildings that live harmoniously within the skeletons of existing buildings. So next, I'm going to talk about a project that I like to call our American project. This is our most American project. I know it doesn't look like it. Oh, it's stuck. Okay. So this was a project that was sponsored by the U.S. government, by the State Department, through something called the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which funds development projects around the world. We won this competition to rehabilitate a large part of the Fez Medina, which is a UNESCO protected site. Our dear friends from UNESCO who love us. And the project tackles the morphology and the physical displacement and environmental impact of a large group of people, the copper workers who live within the Medina. And copper work is a very polluting activity, and so the goal was to clean the area by displacing the people into a new area, rehabilitating the existing historic structures, and then bringing them back. The architectural project was to put into place different strategies to address the varying states of dilapidation. We were asked to rebuild 4 historic caravanserai from the 14th to the 17th centuries. And the entire project was made exclusively with traditional materials and techniques. And we put into place an apprenticeship program because, as with many other historic buildings, the know-how of the master artisans is a disappearing thing. So we had to hunt down the people who could still do these crafts, and we put into place an apprenticeship program to train young workers. The construction was especially challenging because Fez is an automobile-free city, and so all the materials had to be brought in the traditional way, which is by mule, donkeys. So we found ourselves calculating how many kilos of materials could be brought by each donkey, how much rest each donkey needed. Luckily, the donkeys weren't on the 35-hour week. If they were French donkeys, we would have been in trouble. But and these, I'm showing you pictures of 2 fonduques that we rehabilitated, called Chemin Between. They're just a few meters from each other. They're almost adjacent, and they were built 150 years apart from each other. They were both completely run down, so we renovated both of them, and we linked them so they became kind of a Siamese twins. Within them, we put in community services, and there's artist workshops and live space, and so it became the heart of the community after. Want to describe the building? More? So as you can see, we use the traditional materials and methods, but we didn't mimic what was there. This is a modern interpretation of the craft work. Oh, fine, go ahead.
Just to finish one thing on Fez, we've built on this project our dogma on rehabilitation. That's how we decided how we're going to approach these things. So there's 2 rules. One is, if it's there, we keep it. If we know about it, because it's recorded, drawn, photographed, we redo it. If we don't know or it's not there, we make something new. And we do that with the same people building those 3 things. And that was an incredible experience to be able to do that, because we are not there to show what our intervention is. You disappear completely. It's not, let's keep exactly the way it was and let's put a little joint and then let's put a metal piece just to show that we did it. We don't have to show our presence. And that's a humbling experience. And it made us realize that, or at least that's how I like to think about it, working with a building, and Linna said it before, we never touch the ground. when we never create a new foundation next to a building that's already founded for obvious reasons. But we abide by this rule in a very religious way, not being religious people ourselves. But for us, it makes us think of rehabilitation, of transforming existing buildings, almost like it is to architecture what the art of portrait is to painting. You're working with a subject. There's only so much you can do to it. You can do Rembrandt or you can do Picasso, but it still is a portrait. And, and therefore, it's not at all the same exercise as inventing and founding a new building, if it makes any sense. I feel it was clearer when it was just you, but okay. Did you change this? The next section won't be too long. It's not the most glamorous, but one of the most important to us. It has to do with the city. Talking about the city is always complicated. It's less sexy. The representation is more difficult, but I want to talk about it with three scales: the public space, the urban block, and the city as a whole. We've been fortunate to be working both at a small scale and an extremely large territorial scale. And I want to share with you some of our understanding of what the city has to do with the way we think about ways in which architecture can be relevant again. First, when we talk about the public space and the public prerogative of architecture, we think about it in terms of transgression in the sense that we impose it. We're never asked to build a public space. You make and invent public space. And I'm going to show two projects. The first one is a project for the new municipal theater of Casablanca, which we did at the time, I think, with Rem Koolhaas.
And Clément.
And Clément Blanchet. It was interesting because the site that was given is here. It was at the end of the main colonial axis, where you had the courthouse, the government building, the post office, and a big garden. And in front of that, there was a small garden which they decided to put the National Theater in. The problem is, it was right in front of the main square. And Casablanca has no green space, as some of you can witness here, and we thought it would be an absolute shame to take over one of the last few gardens in the city. So instead of doing that, we put the building in front of the site on the public space by designing a project that is the public space, not in front of it. And that's possible because the tradition of the theater in Morocco has to do with halqa. It has to do with not me sitting in front of you, but you sitting around me. People who go from villages to villages and cities to cities and tell stories in a way that it's engaging with everybody around it. So we had to do a modern theater in open public space. Needless to say, we didn't win the competition because we built on a site that wasn't ours. But the problem of this thing is that you're in the room, you're brainstorming, and then you put this idea forth. And once you said it, you can't take it back. Because you know it's absolutely what needs to happen. You know you've got no chance in hell of winning.
We like to lose spectacularly.
Yeah, this was one of those spectacular moments. The cut plane is quite beautiful because you see the two theater both open, obviously, to the room, to the foyer, and also open to the public space. That was a very interesting experience in the way that you change the relationship between a simple architectural program to make it into an urban public space program. The second one is a project for which we've been asked to design a parking lot for a very large company in the middle of the city. And it was complicated because it was right around the Arab Spring, you said that? So the notion of a lot of people getting together, people weren't so hot about it at the time. And the public space in Morocco is something quite fundamentally important, but it's never a static space. It's two things. It's déambulatoire, you walk, and it's commercial. It only works if people can buy things and walk around it. So the notion of a plaza never works. And there was this beautiful, quaint little roundabout in the city with an old closed market, which was built by Zevaco, and beautiful old trees, which had to go away for lots of different reasons. So the intervention on this project, which was going to be just a parking, was to do two things. First, instead of keeping it an island around the circulation, we closed two streets. I told you it's not glamorous, but that changes everything. All of a sudden, you don't play Frogger to go to it. It is connected to the sidewalk. The second thing is that we decided, because of the remaining two streets are the two main arteries of the city, to not put the public space on the top of the surface of the plaza, but to sink it. So not only did we not just do a parking, but we took away a level of parking to put shops. I don't know what happened. And that was extremely complicated. And we had to build an entire business case to make them realize that the commercial space would work. And we realized that a building touches the city very quickly, but when you touch the public space, it takes a lot of time for people to deal with it. And nobody deals very well with void. And I remember this story, which is quite important to me, because the only thing that I cared about was this: don't put anything in it. And our client was like, no, let's put a fountain or something. Let's just put a clock tower. And His Majesty the King, when he saw the drawings, and I have his remarks on it, he had just come back from New York during the winter, and he wanted to put an ice skating ring because he had seen the rocks. Literally, people were scared of something where nothing would happen. And in truth, we closed the street and this street. We sunk the thing. We created these stores, but nothing happened for a while. People were going around it very suspiciously. And that's where we realized that it takes time for these things to happen. And all of a sudden, there was a big festival, music festival, and it literally looked like this, like ghost town. Everything around was working, and nothing was going there. People didn't know whether it needed to be inaugurated. They were waiting for something to happen, even though the building literally was finished for, I don't know, 2 years. And they ran out of space to have a big party. That happened. When that happened, two things happened. First, I called my lawyer because the slab was not dimensioned for this. I want to make sure that if anything happened, we were covered. But two, we realized that these kind of events, any kind of event, are necessary for people to take over the space. And after that, it's something that starts belonging to the city. So that's for public space. Now, let's talk urban blocks. It's getting less and less sexy, you'll see. That's a project to the left. We didn't design this. The worst developer you can imagine. Imagine the worst developer. This is like 10 times that. Takes over a space that is so dear to me, which was the old zoo in the town where I grew up. And decides this used to be the zoo and proposes this. This is a non-urban design. What it does is it creates a geometrical figure. It could be in Dubai, it could be in China, it could be anywhere, where the center is in the middle of the figure, where it's all a mimic of an Osmanian urban block, but on steroids, because instead of 5 stories, it's 8 or 10 stories. The level of density is incredible because this is about 2 million square meter. So that's 20 million square feet. And they started building the first part. This crust is built, this crust is built. The city is horrified. Pushes the developer to launch a competition. We do the competition, we win. The only parameter that couldn't change is the density, obviously. I told you about the guy. So what we decided to do is to demonstrate that without changing the maximum height, we could de-urbanize the project by simply keeping pockets of the zoo in the middle of a new urban development. So instead of this pseudo-Osmanian urban block, we create huge urban blocks which have no more relationship to a front street or a back courtyard, but are traversed by the park. This relationship where you start creating buildings that have neither front nor back, that are traversed by the roads, and that encapsulates part of an incredible landscape that was there. We never thought that it would go for it. We won the competition. They realized that they would make a lot more money with it because we build 3 times less road, we have 6 times more green space, and they can still build as much square footage as they want. So we won it, we're finishing it, we're coordinating the entire thing, and we're just finished delivering the first series of housing projects within it. Second question about the urban block, where you can question the urban planning as it is. This is a beautiful piece of the palm grove in Marrakech, La Palmeraie. And we were hired to take over a project designed by an American firm, but it could be any American firm. One of those acronyms, you know.
No names will be
Okay,
mentioned.
you know them all. And I look at this, and it's Disneyland. It's Disneyland. I mean, it's the little village with its main street. It's a little suburban development. It's a large hotel. All this with a little curvy road because that's, you know, how you think people want to live in. And the reality is that it has nothing to do with the site, which is agrarian, agricultural. Obviously, there are a lot of tourists, but they don't want to come here to have a piece of Southern California in it. But obviously, they would do these buildings, but pull, you know, arcades and tiles and make them look like it's an Ottoman palace. So what we proposed when this didn't work is to say, okay, you're starting to build in a place where there's nothing. What kind of urbanism can be a form of pioneering? You say pioneering? Okay. How do you settle? So we looked at these enclosed zones, the enclosed cities, which are defensive form of architecture, which obviously exists in Morocco, but you have them all over the Mediterranean. This is in France, Chateau Fort, right? The reason why we're interested in this is that we were looking for a form of settlement that is both urban and architectural, that is not planned and then designed. It is built as an urban fabric. So we start researching this element, and we realized it had one interest, two. One, it requires very little infrastructure because once you get one road that leads to it, then the whole thing becomes a single building. Two, because it's a single building, you don't feel like you're in a construction site for 20 years because they're each contained element. So we started doing a form of case studies of working with these elements, which are 150 meter long, so 500 feet, is that? And try to say, okay, that's not the public space. The public space are within these things, and these are walled-in cities. And we decided then to propose not one, not two, but each one as its own story, almost like if each one was one of the invisible cities of Italo Calvino. One of them is a flying carpet, I kid you not, that's how we called it, because when they couldn't understand it, something that's just slightly lifted from the ground, and all we wanted is for people to walk on top of it, so they are the height of the fruit. That they couldn't understand, but when I said flying carpet, they liked it. Sometimes it beats me. And I'm not below this. That's very important. We don't need to be right. We don't care. We just want them to let us do our thing. So there were a series of enclosed mega building. So it's almost the opposite of the projects I showed you before. The first one is a mega urban block where each building is separate. This is a building big enough that it becomes an urban structure. And we've been working on many of these kinds of meditations. And I say meditations because we realize that cities are built mostly on two models, which are carpet bombed all over the world. And there's the necessity to invent new forms of living. And when I say new form of living, I know there's a stigma with new townships because we all like old cities, New York, Boston, Paris, layered, 1,000 years old. The problem is not everybody can and would live in those things. And we're urbanizing the planet at such an incredibly rapid rate that I feel like architects, because they can't do Paris, they just give up. Because the notion of a new township, a city that needs to be built instead of 1,000 years in 5 years. And this notion of foundation a city, there's something so powerful. You know, there's a political statement in grounding a new form of urban presence. I love this drawing of a Filaret for Zinda, where there's the big geometrical figure, and it's all about not how to draw the city, but where the city should happen. But he got me at the House of Vice and Virtue, but that's a different story. This project is probably the first and most important urban project we had worked on, and we've since worked on 5 large new townships. One of them we're building right now. But we all learned on this project. We didn't say to the client because that we didn't know what we were talking about before, but he was crazy enough to follow us in our project. This site, 3,500 hectares, so about half the size of Manhattan, 2/3 of the size of Paris, but an incredible nature. Nothing has ever happened in it. The problem is that you're in a poor country where the government can't bring you the basic amenities. Normally, before you start building any new development, you have to have roads, water, electricity, sewage, and telephones. In this case, if we were to build with what the infrastructure was there, we could do a township for 5,000 people. They wanted to build for 150,000 people, 150,000 habitants. So we invented a notion which sounds insane, which is a city with a finite number of people. You know Le Corbusier cité d'habitation? Okay, c'est la cité d'habitation de grandeur conforme, meaning it's made for one dimension of 1,657 inhabitants. So what if a city could have only a finite number of people, that it can't grow after that? And you define this maximum threshold on how much infrastructure you can have only there. Nothing comes from the outside. It's the first project that's completely disconnected from any form of regional or national network. It's all based on how much water you can harvest. So we had to understand the land a little bit better. So we start with the site. We realize that there are 3 little rivers, 3 little canyons going through it. We look at the topography and see that there's a very large ravine at the very bottom of the site. We put a structure to build a series of dams to collect the water. We connect these little streams together, and we protect them to make sure that the water doesn't get polluted, and it creates a blue network. We redivide the entire city almost like a farmland. We don't create urban plots, we create farm plots, things that are 2 acres each, which makes it not a city that you draw, but you build an agrarian landscape that then gets to be colonized over time. The only thing we do is, in green, we show the piece of land that will have to stay agricultural because they're part of the slope system that brings the water down. We build a basic road network with public transportation. We redivide the entire site. We look at the plots that can be built, the plots that cannot be built. We connect all of that and say, okay, maybe we don't want a city. We want a network of small villages and high pockets of density, the rest being extremely low density. And we put all that together. Essentially, it's only 2 things. It's a blue network of water, a green network of fields, and a white network of roads. And it's only deciding what can be built, what can be unbuilt, and what is unbuiltable. And everything else we didn't care so much about. This was probably the most interesting learning exercise, because we realized that sustainability, when it comes on top of an existing element, is the first thing that goes away when you have to value engineer it. But sustainability, when it actually allows you to do something that you couldn't do otherwise, that becomes interesting. And that is something that became part of the DNA of the office. In everything we do, we look for the necessity of it. We only keep what's absolutely necessary. And if it's not, then we build the necessity for it. And again, we're not not all straightforward strategies to make it necessary, but we make it necessary. Sometimes we push the local government to hijack the project and push our client to do something that we couldn't push him to do it. We sometimes have to work against our client, but otherwise nothing is possible. We had the fortunate experience of working with very crazy Indian engineers who are actually at the tip of the spear of these kinds of experiences, which they had done at a very small scale, say small urban development of 10 hectares. And we took that and we multiplied it by 6,000.
Oh.
What did I say?
Typo.
Typo? Sorry. So, okay, last strategy. Once we've built landscape, once we've reinvented familiar forms of architecture, once we've cannibalized all the buildings, once we reinvented the city, we imagine that one of the elements that makes architecture relevant is to put architecture in the most extreme of conditions. You recognize these dudes? I don't know how politically aware you guys are. This is our old French president, Nicolas Sarkozy. This is the late president of Libya, Gaddafi, two very big humanitarian people. This is 2007, I kid you not. Gaddafi comes to Paris and actually puts his tent in front of the tomb of Napoleon. Incroyable. And he lets him do it. And he buys a whole bunch of things. Radars and bombs so he can kill his own population, that sort of things. And the French government sells him everything they can sell him. And one of the things they sell him is the replanning of all Libyan cities, which they give to a state-owned institution called Yaourif, which is an incredible institution that manages the entire region, Île-de-France, where Paris is. So they're some of the most learned urban planners that I've ever worked with. So what they did is they kept for themselves Benghazi and Tripoli, which are the two main cities, with the success that you probably have seen. And they've hired us, subcontracted us, for working in the desert for all the 50 cities of the Fezzan, which is the southern part of Libya, which is essentially the Darfur. What we realized that the reason why France did it isn't because they wanted to help Gaddafi, but they are realizing what is evident now is that the southern borders of Northern Africa and Libya in particular is actually the southern border of Europe. So it's important for Europe to invest in the planning of the cities so that these people stay there, because there's a pull effect. Sub-Saharan African come to Libya, Libyans come to Italy, Italians come to France, and so on and so forth. So the planning had a very deep political strategy, which we had no problem with, by the way, because I've always considered planning as a deep form of deterioration, which always brings in uprising. If you look at Haussmann's work, this is l'Avenue de l'Opéra in Paris, tears down entire parts of Paris, creates the Paris you know today, but it's impossible to imagine Haussmann without La Commune, with the uprising that comes right after. And we usually like to be on the other side of that mirror, but in this particular case, we were on the Haussmann side of it, and it was absolutely interesting. The first thing that happened to us is that we looked at the entire map, and we realized that it's a coastal urbanism, and they're treating the desert like it's an ocean. And there's a big train, 5 large cities, Sebha, Oubari, Gat, je sais plus qu'est-ce que j'oublie, Mourzouk, yeah. And 5 big cities, 47 very, very small cities. And all that is sitting on a fossil water table, meaning a huge amount of water, but that doesn't get recreated because it doesn't rain. And Gaddafi was crazy enough to bring the water from the desert to the coast to irrigate the agriculture. So we did simple math, and we realized that there's not enough water for everybody. So imagine urban planning, which is a discipline that's been created to organize the growth of cities since the 19th century because of industrial revolution. And that you have to use the same skill set, not to organize the growth, but to organize the disappearance of cities. We actually have to go to see the mayor and tell him, we're only keeping 5 out of 50, and even the 5, we're really only keeping 1. We're creating huge metropole, huge megalopole, because the only way to survive is to put everybody in one place. It's not nice, but it's the only way. So we worked in Sebha, which is an incredibly beautiful town. By the way, for those who can't imagine it, Libya is an incredibly beautiful country, some of the most beautiful coast and desert and Roman remains. A bit of a hotspot right now, but in a few years, if you can go, you should. I'm not going to go into detail of it, but in one of these projects where we look at the tool of our trade and realize that they're a tool of warfare, that when Caesar goes to Gaul and builds roads, it's not for people, it's for his armies. That when Gaddafi asks the French people to replan the city, it's not for the well-being of his people, but it's a matter of control. And that if we have to replan them, it's because the only single resource there is, which is water, is not enough for everyone. So we worked on this project for 4 years. We stopped 3 months before the uprising. We could never have an aerial photograph of Sebha. I could only get it in February of 2011 when it started being bombed on the TV. But this notion of an urbanism of disappearance, of organizing the obsolescence of cities, okay, it works in the desert because it's an extreme condition, but extreme conditions teach us about the common. And I don't like to talk about Detroit because I don't know it, but most of suburban America, which has been built in the last 15 years, can't sustain itself. The sprawl makes no sense. We've got to find a way for all of these environment to disappear and find a way in which it goes back to nature. Whether it's in Spain, where the economical crisis emptied entire sections of the city, or in Greece, or in America, we have to be able to rethink urbanism, not just as a way of growing cities, but also as a way of making them disappear. It's like kind of doomsday today. I don't know why. I'm usually a happier person than this. You want to talk about it? Okay. So that was the first desert, extreme condition. With Linna, we built the first pavilion at the Biennale of Venice for Morocco, which never was present there. Nobody asked us to do it. We didn't have any client. It's just, we won an award, we went there. We realized that Rem Koolhaas was going to be the curator. We asked him whether he liked the notion. The president of the Biennale liked the idea. The ambassador of Morocco liked the idea, and we decided to do it, which meant two things. A, we had to do absolutely everything, because unlike countries which were organized to do it, we had no curatorial system. We had to do from transportation to catering to designing the book and making the models. We had to do absolutely everything, which took 12 people for a year in our office to do this. But second is, in order to jumpstart it, and I was telling that story, I think, to some people at lunch, we had a major problem. Everybody wanted it, but Morocco needed to be invited, of course. And the Biennale needed the country of Morocco to ask. They just send me a letter where the state of Morocco says that he wants to be here. And the Minister of Culture in Morocco said, just send me a letter where the president of the Biennale invites us formally. So I faked somebody's signature and I sent it, and it went all fine. I'm not joking, but it's after I told them afterward, and they laughed. It could have gone wrong, but sometimes when you think it's impossible, it's just a signature that needs to be faked.
You've been doing it on your report cards ever since you were small.
True. The theme for that Biennale was fundamentals. Rem wanted to explore the history of the last 100 years, 1914, 2014. We absolutely loved the idea because the contribution of Morocco of that 100 years is immense. It's been one of the greatest theater of invention of modern architecture for the last 100 years. It's been a place where many architects came to experiment radical forms of architecture, both formally but also with social experiment, where us were guinea pigs in it, and it didn't turn out too bad. But very few people know of that experiment, including Moroccans who are not very familiar with it. So we wanted to put that in front, and we chose one building for every decade, and stopped in 1984. In front of that, we wanted to not just have a historical dimension, but we wanted to invite both Moroccan architects, but also foreign architects. Because one of the contributions of Morocco is to have been open always to foreign influence, to think about a territory that is at the heart of the identity, but that nobody goes to or talks about, is the Sahara. There's a political issue that it's a slightly disputed country in Morocco. We consider it Moroccan. Not everybody completely agrees with it. But in order to avoid the political conversation, we considered that outside of having just an activist conversation saying it's ours, let's just inhabit it. Let's just go there. And, it's a form of a manifest destiny, right? So we gave 1 cubic kilometer of desert, 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, to 8 architects, a few Moroccans, Spaniards, French, Italians. And we asked them to explore how you can inhabit the uninhabitable. And we had absolutely incredible result. The scenography which we did, we brought in sand from the Sahara, which was 100 cubic meter of it. We put it all on the ground there. We didn't want light, so we brought in a sky which was a huge screen of 300 square meter, which was slightly vaulted. Why? Because in the desert, the people of the desert are like navigators, because the ground shifts all the time. They only move with the stars. So we had the buildings at the bottom, the sky on top, which was showing two things. It was showing the buildings of these increments of 10 years, not as they were, but as they became. As Linna showed you, Nida Bay, all of them were kind of reinvented that way. And the capacity to metabolize what comes from the outside was important. And also all of the exploration on the desert. And the movie was doing during the day, showing the buildings, and at night, showing the sky of the desert. There's been many explorations. One of us, we did, and I'll go through them quickly. Some were absolutely incredible. Fernando Meniz, who's a Spanish architect based in the Canary Islands, right in front of the desert, built this incredible, huge rock structure that's only there to capture the moisture and to start creating an ecosystem inside. I'm not going to go through all the project. This is a re-inhabitation of phosphate mines that's been proposed. That's one of the most incredible projects. Those are young Italians who won the competition we launched for this. And the project isn't the outside. It's not even the inside. It's only the thickness of the wall in it. And the desert, as an extreme condition, pushes architecture in its most primitive, primal, ontological dimension. In other terms, no bullshit. And that's a section of their building, the space in between. The building was built in travertine, just one big block, Italians. And that's the project we proposed, which was based on a simple notion. It's extremely hot during the day, it's extremely cold at night. Usually in a city, we live next to each other. You live here and you work here. What if we start reimagining what happens in a city by looking at what happens during the day, which is below, and what happens at night, which is above? And all the vertical connection of the city. I know we had this conversation yesterday, but this notion of the vertical relationship to the city as a metaphor for going up in the sky has always been used, from Ibn Arabi to Leonardo da Vinci, the city above, the city below. And we actually wanted to build it and see how it would work. And we built it with the same inclination as the sand dunes. So they're each floor plate, which rotate and reduce as they go up. It's an extremely simple form of architecture. It's important in these extreme conditions to allow for speculative forms of architecture, not ones that not only cannot be built, but shouldn't be built, but they also percolate in the rest of our work. This is a project competition we've just won a few months ago for an extremely big high school in a very bad master plan, which we didn't do, but that's the building we did. And it's in the middle of the desert, right next to the ocean. And we have a big program and not small site. It's a high school for 1,000 kids when they all have to live there. And we have to build 30,000 square meter, and we have 30,000 square meter of land. It's extremely hot during the day, so it's almost impossible to have a yard. So what decided is not to put a roof on the building, but to make a building that is a roof. So that would be the ground floor, where we would put, that's the city below, where we put all the public elements, from the sports area to the amphitheater to the library to the student center and so on. And the space below is the rest of the public space. And that's the element above, which is where all the classrooms are. And it creates that kind of environment. We would not have developed a project like this if we hadn't worked on the project in Venice. And which is why whenever I have students who consider that there's a form of architecture which is practical and one that's theoretical, they don't understand that it's not only completely linked, but if you refuse the notion that they are linked, you're doing neither theory nor practice. Thank you.